Internet, Magicman here from mmobomb.com, freezing my ass off outside here to do an episode of Ask MMOBomb. As you can see, in my neck of the woods, we're going to be having a white Christmas. And before we get started, I just want to take a minute to wish every MMO bomber Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. If you don't celebrate a holiday, find somebody you love and hang out for a little while. It's been a crazy year. MMOBomb's been growing, and that's all because of you, and it's been a lot of fun. So I wish you the best as we close in on 2013. So, in the spirit of the holidays, ho ho ho, let's get to the questions. Okay, so Noble Might wants to know, do you think publishers actually get hands-on time with games, or are they just fed some fancy schmancy PowerPoint presentation? I know a lot of them say that they actually play their games, but I question how long they've actually played them. Interesting question. There's a couple different situations that go on here, and a lot of it has to do with if the developer is a well-known beast. For instance, a BioWare. If you, before Star Wars: The Old Republic, if you would have contracted BioWare, you would have had a great deal of confidence in the type of product that they were going to produce for you. So as a publisher, they were a pretty safe investment. You might disagree with that now based on the success of Star Wars, depending on how much of that you put on EA and not on BioWare. So it has to do a lot with the developer's name, first off. Two, it has to do with the state that you actually become the publisher. Were you the publisher from the beginning? Or are you picking up a project that somebody else scrapped? And three, it has to do with the publisher and what their requirements are for a game. So, let's take a look at the most common scenario, which is I'm a developer and you come along and I pitch you an idea and you agree to publish it. Most companies, again, most companies are not going to agree to publish anything without seeing some hands-on time. Now, does that mean that they're playing versions of the game from the onset? No. But they want to see the entire functionality of the title, at least on paper, and they use what's sometimes called paper models, where you have bits and pieces built out of paper and show all of your systems running, and your core mechanics and things like that, or even some 3D models, some artwork, some concept art. They want to see that stuff. They're going to want to see that at least to agree to publish it. And then, during the development cycle, yes, they are going to periodically play the game. I think your question focuses more on, do some of these publishers know they're putting out bad titles, rather than how long do they actually play? Because let's be realistic, they're not going to play for very long. That's going to be the Q&A team's responsibility, or the QA team's responsibility. That's going to be the testers. It's going to be the community managers. That's going to be their job in-house to play the game for great lengths of time. The publishers themselves aren't going to be playing for huge hundreds and hundreds of hours that it would take to really know an MMO inside and out, every mechanic, every system. They're just not going to do it. So in order to answer your question, which I think is more, do publishers know that sometimes they put out less than stellar games? I think the answer is yes. I think there are obviously some companies out there that are okay with putting out a less than stellar product because they know that it costs them less, but they can make just about the same amount of money as they did on a previous project. So as a whole, publishers aren't going to agree to develop anything that they can't see the actual core systems working, but I think there are some publishers that are willing to have that knock-in quality because in the end it costs them less, but they think they can make the same amount of money. Does it always work that way? Of course not. That's why we see games closing that were opened, 2 months ago, that type of thing. Publishers do not play to the extent that you're asking, where they've invested hundreds and hundreds of times hours into the MMO like you have, but during the whole development cycle, yes, they are getting some hands-on time with the game. Keep in mind, though, they're probably getting shown the bits and pieces that the developer says, hey, this is ready, why don't you go ahead and check this? And those are probably the very cool, very working right things, because it's essentially your boss and you want to impress them, right? So, no, but yes, they are playing them, just not to the extent that they probably should, that the community team and the QA team, that those guys and girls are testing it. but you're not going to go to a publisher with an idea on a piece of paper and say, hey, would you want to publish this? They've got hundreds and hundreds of ideas coming in daily from their own people. They don't need your ideas. If you want to get something published, then one, you've got to start networking, and two, you have to have core mechanics and systems that you can show work, even if it's just with bits of paper moving around a table. So, yep. Hope that answers your question. Let's get to the next question. Alright, so As in Dragon says, where's Foreign Fridays? I haven't seen it in about 3 months. And we get this question an awful lot, so I did want to bring it up here so that anybody that checks out Ask MMOBomb would know the answer. Spunkify put some information on our forums a while ago when he was starting to have a little bit of a problem with Foreign Fridays and the whole Korean social security number thing. A lot of the titles that he wanted to check out for that show were in the Far East, particularly in Korea. And now the models there have changed to the point where you need a Korean social security number or a KSSN to actually access the game. And Spunkify, living in the United States, of course, does not have such a number. So that pretty much chops off a whole big piece of the Eastern market. So Spunkify's been looking for some other titles, and it gets a little harder to find them that he can have access to and that they play at a reasonable frame rate to get you some footage. We have had some viewers suggest some titles from areas like Malaysia and things like that, and Spunkify is looking into doing those, but because of the whole KSSN situation, Foreign Fridays is not on as normal a schedule as it started and as it was originally going to stay. Some things are unfortunate, so no real way around it unless Spunkify moves to Korea and gets a Korean social security number, and I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. So, yep. You will still see Foreign Fridays, it's just going to be on a much less regular schedule than it was when it first launched, because it's going to be as titles allow, rather than a new title every week. Good question, and I hope that answers it for just about everybody that was asking. Next question! So Noob Style says, did you ever consider that you may have made a viewer quit playing Waren Story with you dogging it so much, and why do you dog it? Alright, I can see your point there a little bit. But Waren Story is bad. And that's not to say that it's the only bad title out there. There are, of course, other ones that we've mentioned, particularly on the Free-to-Play cast. That's where we express our opinions the most. And on this show, of course. If you watch the first look for Waren Story, though, I didn't really dog Waren Story during the first look. And that's kind of my MO. I leave the first looks. I may throw 1 or 2 opinions in the first looks, but I tend to leave those as unbiased as possible, where if something's broken, I'll mention it. If something does seem to work well or works on par with the way it should, I will mention that as well. But I don't really put too many opinions in, rather than maybe saying, you know, the game does a lot of things that other games do. Which isn't a compliment, it isn't a slam, it's just a statement of fact, trying to compare things for you guys when you're trying to figure out whether you should play a new game or not. On the Free-to-Play cast, though, and on other shows, I have given Waren Story a hard time. But that's because it deserves it. And am I concerned that viewers might not play it based on me dogging it? No, I'm not really concerned about that, because the viewers that are interested in playing Waren Story probably checked out the first look, and then made that decision whether or not they wanted to play Waren Story. And every game's a different beast for every type of different fan anyway. So, just because Waren Story isn't my cup of tea, I don't think it particularly does anything very good or good enough to make me not play another game and come and play it, doesn't mean that it's not going to be for somebody else. And I've always been a big proponent of that, where if I don't like something, you may like it. If it's your cup of tea, you've always heard me say, if it's your cup of tea. If it is, great, go for it. I dog it because it's a mediocre title, at best, that does 900 things that other MMOs already do. It came out of nowhere, and visually it looks like an older game. To me, there's not much there worth playing, leaving another game to play. And so that's why I dog it. And you're right, it has kind of become my whipping boy for 2012. So we'll get a new whipping boy for 2013, and then anybody that wants to check out Waren Story can. But I think if a viewer... I'd like to think that my opinion matters when a viewer watches something, but because I leave the opinion out of the first look most of the time, and that's pretty much where you're judging whether you want to play a game or not, no, I don't think I've shunned too many people away from Waren Story, or fans of Waren Story aren't going to quit just because one guy on one website doesn't like it. So no, I'm not worried about that, because gamers tend to make their own opinions anyway. They may go into a game knowing that 900 people said this game was awful and it sucked, but they're still going to go make their own opinion anyway. Look at how many people went and played Star Wars The Old Republic when it launched for free, even though every media and gaming outlet said this is a horrible model, and the game isn't all that fun after level 50. Still had a huge influx of players, and they continue to. So, no, I'm not worried about driving people away from a title, but you're right, I'll get a new whipping boy for 2013. Waren Story served its purpose enough. And if you want to give Waren Story a check, go ahead, find the link on our website, give it a whirl. I will tell you one good thing about Waren Story, though, that I did like, just to keep this fair and balanced. There is a queuing system for PvE events, much like you would queue for a PvP event in Waren Story. One of the events that I did in the first look was a series of 3 rooms with progressively larger and larger groups of monsters that were stronger and stronger, with one boss in each room, too. And if you died, you were out of there, but if you stayed in, you got to reap the benefits of clearing each of these rooms, and it was a huge group when you queued up. It was like 20 or 30 people. That was actually pretty fun, and a system I'd like to see implemented somewhere else. So if you want to check it out, the only place I know of to get that type of experience was Waren Story. There are other games that have a PvE queuing event, but this was a pretty nice little event and the way it worked. So the only way you can check that out that I know of is Waren Story. If you know another title that has a similar type thing, throw it in the comments below for the viewers to check out. Next question. Alright, so Rockmia says, "Hi Magicman, I've been following MMOBomb for over a year now, and I want to know, why doesn't there seem to be any good titles releasing, free-to-play titles releasing in December of this year? Last year at this time, I had 2 or 3 titles that I was playing, but it seems now the only ones that are on the horizon that I keep hearing people talk about are Hawken and Firefall and Neverwinter and Wizardry, all pushed to next year." That's an interesting question, and I commented that on the website too, that was an interesting question and one I was going to take a look at. So the first thing I had to do, keep in mind I've been with MMOBomb for a year, it was last November that I joined. So I had to do some internet research, pulled out the old Google, and found out what free-to-play games launched in like the last quarter of 2011. And I was looking for October, but more November, December-ish periods. And what I found was kind of surprising. I felt the same way as Rockmaeus did, where there's been a lot less free-to-play titles that came out, but the numbers weren't that different as far as titles that were actually released. I think you're noticing this huge difference, and a lot of gamers are, this year compared to last year, because there was a lot more going into open beta around November, December than went into open beta this November and December. And I think there's pretty much 2 reasons for it. One, titles weren't ready. They were advertised way too far or way too soon, earlier this year as being available at the end of this year. And they came out of nowhere. Normally we hear about those top tier titles that we all want to play, the Neverwinters, the Hawkins, those ones that everybody's talking about. We normally hear about them a good year to a year and a half in advance and then follow their progression for a year and a half. These titles, some of them we just found out about in February and March, and all of a sudden they were supposed to be upon us in December. So I think there was a lot of that going on where people really wanted to push titles out in 2012 to help their 2012 fiscal year, and it just didn't work out. The second thing that I think factors into this is look at what was not free to play that came out in the final quarters and the final parts of 2012. You had... Damn, that's cold. I'm going to wait till the wind subsides for a minute. All right. Look at what happened in the later parts of 2012 this year with titles that weren't free to play. You had World of Warcraft drop its expansion. You had Guild Wars 2 drop. You had Rift drop its expansion. You had a bunch of pay-to-play or buy-to-play titles that had huge press followings and huge word of mouth and huge budget dollar marketing campaigns come out, bam, right at the end of the year. End of September into mid-November. Boom. I don't want a part of that. If I'm a free-to-play company and I want to get my game out there with as much hype and buzz as I can, I don't want to be anywhere near that release window. And so I think that might have had an influence on some companies saying, we were going to go into open beta in December, let's kind of push that to January. One, it's getting too late in December, and we're not going to have the staff on hand that we have at normal peak business times, so we're justified in getting away from this release window. I think that played a big part in it. It was just a huge fourth quarter as far as some buy-to-play and pay-to-play games go, that I think some free-to-play games just didn't want a piece of that release window, or didn't want to have to compete. And then, if they did decide to compete, they would have to do it with a shorter staff based on holiday schedules anyway. And then, of course, some of them just weren't flat out ready, is the second part of that. But it's shaping up to be an exciting January. You've got a ton of games that we've been waiting for all year. In January and February, all of a sudden, boom, open beta and release. So, yes, December's a little slow, but you're probably playing something already anyway, so stick to it for a couple more weeks, and in January you should be happy. Next question. Alright, so Chef Madness says, Magicman, I had a very important question posted on the comments of the last video, and I hope you pick it to be on the next video. I want to know why when MMOBomb does first looks, why don't you cover the most important aspect of an MMO? The chat panel and social windows. That's why I play an MMO, the number one reason, and the most interesting thing for me. Making friends. Chef has asked this before, and I've kind of talked to, this was a while ago, I think, and I talked to him him or her on the comments on the website when they brought it up initially. And then, when I saw it again for this show, God, that one is cold. I really wanted to cover it, because Chef's right. We kind of glaze over the whole social panel thing, and I think it's because it's one of those systems we take for granted, right? It's one of those things in an MMO where you just expect to work and expect to work in the way you want it to. You want to be able to talk in the general chat, whisper your friends, talk in party chat, go to guild chat, look at a combat log, and we kind of take it for granted that it works. Until you run into a game that has chat limitations. And then all of a sudden you might be a little surprised by that because you don't see it all the time. Aeon, I don't know if it's still this way, I'll have to look, but Aeon in Europe, if you didn't buy the veteran pack for like $5 off of GameForge, the chat was restricted. So it does happen in other games. And you're right, we kind of should take a look at that, especially if when we go into a first look, we know that there's chat restrictions. That's definitely something we should bring up. That's a huge key component to that whole social element of MMOs. That, you're right. You know, there's no two ways around it. I'm wrong. You're right. We should cover that, especially, even if it's just hey, there's no chat restrictions. You've got group, party, guild, everything that you think Whisper, it's there. Even if it's something as short as that, or, hey, here's the chat panel, let's take a look at it, and here's some emotes, and, oh, by the way, you're restricted to this, this, or this. Chef, you're right. Merry Christmas. Next first look I do, I'll cover the chat panel, and I'll at least mention it from here on out, whether there's restrictions or not for you. You win. I'm sorry. My bad. Let's go with the last question for today. My man, One Man Wolfpack says, do you think a truly sandbox-based MMO, something like Worm Online, will ever catch on? Gamers say they want one, but then they never really attract a huge fan base. No. Gamers, I think there's a difference here in what some people consider sandbox and what the term sandbox actually means. Somebody else had a question on the site that I was going to use for today, but I'll just answer it briefly here. Forgive me, I don't remember their name. But what does AAA mean? you know, we have a lot of those gaming terms that some people define in different ways. In gaming, by the way, AAA comes from like the minor league designation for baseball teams or sports teams and things like that. Basically, if you're talking to the marketing department, AAA means they've spent a buku amount of marketing dollars for it. If you're talking to the developers, they think AAA means that the budget for the actual game was very, very high. Really, to me, the basic way to think of a AAA title, publishers think about it in terms of sales. AAA to them is a unit they can expect to have, or at least has had, 1 million sales. When the media or websites like ours uses the term AAA, usually we're referring to it just to mean that it is a top-tier budget and or marketing. You know, it's expected to be a class act title based on its production value. It does not mean that the game is good. Big distinction there. It just means that the budget behind it and the workings and the mechanics of it are all solid and well done. Now, let's go take a look and see if the game's any good. So along with that, and One Man Wolfpack's question, I think there's different interpretations of Sandbox. I just did a first look for Salem, which you should see, which you guys will see in a couple of days here. I don't know if it'll go up before or after this, but whatever. And Salem is a crafting-based MMO that I would consider a sandbox-type game. You are plunked down in the city. It is a persistent world. The world is shaped by what the players do, what they build, where they build it, what skills they learn. That is a sandbox MMO. People are going to watch the Salem first look and talk about how bad it is. It's going to happen. One, it's not visually impressive. And two, it's a sandbox MMO. It's boring as hell to watch somebody play Salem. I mean, honestly, I'll put it that way. But there are players like myself that would get addicted to that type of stuff and play it non-stop, 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 even though it looks like we're doing the same things over and over. I don't think you see too many truly sandbox titles like that because, you're right, One Man Wolfpack, they just don't acquire the player base that they need to stay successful. I think Salem will do well, particularly because I don't think Paradox spent an arm and a leg developing it. So I think they were really careful about what we can spend versus what we expect to make. Although I don't have details on exactly how their cash shop's going to work, besides the little bit I was able to see doing the first look where you can buy the silver currency, which I don't know if I like. But I think you're going to see sandbox elements in more mainstream. Holy shit! Ah! I'm so glad this is the last question. I think you're going to see more sandbox elements in mainstream MMOs, not bigger and bigger sandboxy things. However, Smedley over at Sony Online Entertainment has made some interesting comments about EverQuest Next, which you should take a look at, being sandbox, so we'll see. But my prediction is you're not going to see too many truly sandbox titles because they're just not expected to pick up millions and millions and millions of players. What you would need to do to get that, though, is you would need an IP that already has a huge following and build a sandbox MMO based on that. That would definitely help you out, especially if you executed it well, because the IP would bring a lot of people over to your game. So that's, I think, what you would need. EverQuest definitely has that following, so EverQuest Next could definitely be the one to take advantage of an empty sandbox market right now. Not empty, but almost empty sandbox market right now, because the EverQuest name would be enough to bring a lot of people over to check it out. So, might be interesting to watch Sony Online Entertainment and EverQuest Next as that shapes up. But yeah, there you go. That's all the time we have for today. I'm going to go back inside and warm up because I am freezing. I hope all of you have a wonderful holiday season. And if you don't celebrate a holiday, that's okay. Find a loved one, sit down, play a game. I'm Magicman. Please don't forget your questions below on the site. You can even email them to magicman@mmobomb.com. If you don't send questions, we got no show. So make sure you submit your questions. And until next time, gang, stay safe, and I'll see you out on the servers. Oh my god. Shit. They ain't moving, they be watching, so I'm out here doing work. Then I get the party popping, cause with every minute wasting, know my chances steady dropping.